Starting in 15 seconds, everybody. The subcommittee will come to order, and I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. And as a reminder, please keep your microphone muted unless speaking. And should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I will request that the member by name please to mute their microphone. And a reminder as well for members to insert a document into the record. Please have your staff email that document to documentst@mail.house.gov. I'll now follow with an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to today's witnesses joining the Aviation Subcommittee's hearing titled The Leading Edge Innovation in U.S. Aerospace. This is a long overdue discussion to explore promising opportunities for U.S. aerospace, including emerging aerospace entrants and new aviation technologies with potential societal, safety, and environmental benefits. Today's hearing is also a great opportunity to examine challenges in making those concepts a reality, and what Congress and the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, can do to ensure the safe and efficient integration of new entrants and technologies into the National Airspace System, or what we call the NAS. Fostering innovation is one of my top priorities as chair because it will help bolster U.S. jobs and grow the nation's leadership in the aerospace industry. Today's witnesses represent a range of emerging aerospace entrants, from small unpiloted aircraft systems to electric aircraft and supersonic airplanes. I'm also pleased to have representatives from city and tribal governments at the table to highlight why new aerospace entrants and technologies are important to their communities and how to build public acceptance. Once only seen in science fiction or dropping Judy and Elroy off at school, flying cars and air taxis will soon be a reality. With over 70 advanced air mobility, or AAM, concepts in development. Electrical vertical takeoff and landing, or eVTOL vehicles, could reduce traffic congestion and improve mobility options, particularly in dense urban environments. However, the Congress and FAA must consider infrastructure, how new entrants will be integrated into an already busy U.S. airspace, and impacts on local communities. To that end, I do want to welcome today Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti to today's panel. Mayor Garcetti, when we get to you, I know that the city of LA is a leader in helping get AAM options deployed. So I'm interested in hearing more about the city's efforts to prepare for AAM operations in the region, including accounting for community views, ensuring equitable access across the city, and promoting sustainability. New advancements in aerospace technologies are arriving as U.S. aviation works to address pressing challenges such as greenhouse gas emissions and aircraft noise. That's why I'm pleased today as well to welcome Mr. Roy Genzarski, CEO of magniX, an electric propulsion system manufacturer leading the charge on the development of more sustainable and energy-efficient aircraft. magniX is another in a long line of innovators in aviation that are based in Washington State, in this case, in my hometown of Everett, Washington, in my district. Mr. Genzarski, I look forward to your thoughts on how the federal government can help U.S. manufacturing in this increasingly competitive space and help meet environmental goals as well. I want to turn now to unmanned aircraft systems, another area of tremendous growth. The FAA projects the use of drones will reach up over 2 million units by 2024, combining both private and commercial use. Drones are used today to perform critical infrastructure inspections, assist in recovery efforts following natural disasters, and deliver critical medical supplies during the pandemic. Mr. Grimsley is here from the Choctaw Nation. I look forward to learning more about the nation's ongoing project under the FAA's Beyond program to test advanced drone operations and analyze the impact of this technology on tribal and rural communities. Inherent in the growth of new entrants are the potential risks posed to existing airspace users and people and critical assets on the ground. And so in December 2020, the FAA issued 2 long-awaited UAS final rules, which took effect last week, one requiring the remote identification, or ID, of UAS, and another permitting more routine UAS operations over people under certain conditions. So not only would I hope that Mr. Grimsley can address those issues, but Mr. Bree from Skydio is here, and I would like to hear more about the drone industry's reaction to these new rules as well. On to supersonic aircraft. Recent advancements in propulsion technology, materials, and domestic manufacturing have also made supersonic flight more of a reality. Traveling faster than the speed of sound, these flights are projected to significantly reduce transoceanic travel times and open new gateways to support international commerce. However, challenges persist to full deployment of supersonic flight, most notably the lack of internationally recognized certification, noise, or emission standards for supersonic aircraft. So in response to the 2018 FAA reauthorization law, the FAA recently issued a final rule to help facilitate supersonic flight testing and the safe development of such aircraft. And we're joined today by Mr. Blake Scholl, CEO of Boom Supersonic, a U.S. manufacturer at the forefront of developing supersonic passenger aircraft. Mr. Scholl, when we get to you, I'm interested in learning more about Boom's XB-1 concept, your experience with navigating the current regulatory process for supersonic flight, and what is needed both U.S. and internationally to realize the vision. The subcommittee is also joined by Mr. Pierre Harter with the National Institute for Aviation Research at Wichita State University, a leader in aerospace research and development. Mr. Harter, when we get to you, I look forward to your thoughts on the importance of federal investment in research on these technologies and ways to support the next generation of aviation innovators, scientists, and engineers. As the nation works towards long-term economic recovery, this subcommittee will continue its forward-looking agenda on the future of U.S. aerospace and how Congress and the FAA can ensure the U.S. remains the global aviation leader. Congress, the new administration, and the industry and its workforce must work together as we embark on this next generation of U.S. aerospace and ensure that as nascent operations and technologies are integrated in the complex airspace system, the safety of all who fly and those on the ground remain the top priority. So I want to thank you all again, today's witnesses ahead of time. I look forward to your discussion. With that, I want to turn now to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Garrett Graves of Louisiana, for an opening statement. Representative Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, about 2 years ago, back in 2019, we had a hearing that you had scheduled called Aviation 2050, where we were looking at the future of aviation over the next 30 years to try and depict and project what that would look like and what we needed to do during our time to help facilitate that aviation industry in the United States. I don't think any of us anticipated the amazing challenges that we had during that 2-year period. Obviously, the pandemic, the 737 MAX, and other challenges in our community, my home state of Louisiana, 5 named hurricanes just last year. We can't rest on our laurels in regard to the aviation future or being able to maintain the top position globally in regard to aviation. We must continue to work to strive to facilitate that innovation and that growth. Although it's not the title of this hearing, I think Aviation 2030 may be perhaps a better title for this hearing, looking at the aerospace innovation that we can explore and that we can expect to come online over the next decade or so. It seems clear that in the next 10 years, aerospace is going to evolve an ever increasing number of drones, the introduction of electric vertical takeoff and landing, reintroduction of civil supersonic aircraft, as you noted, expanded use of commercial space transportation vehicles. Other nations may choose 1 or 2 technologies to try to excel at or facilitate in their countries. But in the United States, it is our aim, and Mr. Chairman, I believe we share this goal. It is our aim, it is our intention to lead in all of the above technologies. That means making investments upfront, laying the statutory and regulatory foundation for these cutting edge technologies, as was done in the last FAA reauthorization bill. But obviously we need to hear from these witnesses on what needs to be done even beyond. In fact, year after year, reauthorization after reauthorization, the committee and the FAA have worked to ensure that our foundation is solid and it enables rather than stifles innovation, and that it's always laid on the bedrock of safety. For example, last week, rules for UAS remote identification and drone operations over people took effect, which will enable more advanced use of drones. While these rules do represent a major step forward, we know that a true regulatory foundation for drones must include a way for regular, beyond visual line of sight operations. And with these pieces in place, however, it's time to show some progress and reap the benefits of our investment. The economic and societal benefits of UAS promise to be enormous, and industry and communities are quickly finding ways to utilize the foundation that we did lay in these laws. I look forward to hearing from Skydio about the great American-made products they are developing, and from the Choctaw Nation about the innovative use of this technology and the drones that they have in place now. Moving forward, we must take some of the lessons learned from our efforts on drone integration, as the chairman noted, and apply them to advanced air mobility, to supersonic aircraft, and to electric aircraft. Framework for certification and operations, allowing the industry to move forward, and the FAA to ensure safety without spending years drafting overly specific regulations. For example, I'm pleased the FAA has adopted this approach for electric aircraft using the performance-based Part 23 regulations to efficiently measure the safety of proposed electric aircraft. But more broadly, I'm excited the expansive vision is the chairman noted of companies like Magniax, which sees the future where aircraft can be both cleaner and less costly. Boom, which aims to shrink the world and unlock. So look forward to hearing how our cities and communities are working to integrate these new transportation concepts in their planning. I know that Mayor Garcetti, the last time he was before our committee, noted that Republicans or Democrats that went through a NEPA process. So I can't wait to hear his new description of our political parties. But to all witnesses, I want to know where the foundation we've laid needs to work and what you need from us to help you build on it. These technologies are not just innovation for innovation's sake. They're going to drive real benefits and improvements in the lives of our constituents and the well-being of our communities. They'll provide employment for tens of thousands of workers and help stitch together our cities and towns. With the work the subcommittee is doing, our witnesses and the thousands of others like them, American Aerospace will remain at the leading edge of our nation's future and success. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
Thank you, Representative Graves, very much. I want to now welcome the witnesses on our panel. I'll just list the witnesses, and then we have an introduction to be made by one of our members. First, we will hear from the Honorable Eric Garcetti, Mayor, City of LA, Los Angeles, California, accompanied by Ms. Saleta Reynolds, who's the General Manager of the LA DOT. Mr. James Grimsley, the Executive Director, Advanced Technology Initiatives, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Mr. Adam Bree, the Chief Executive Officer of Skydio. Mr. Pierre Harter, Director of Research, National Institute for Aviation Research, Wichita State University. Mr. Roy Ganzarski, Chief Executive Officer of Magniax. And Mr. Blake Scholl, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Boom Supersonic. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We all look forward to your testimony. We have a lot of members, although they are not here in the hearing room, they are live with us online, and I know they have a lot of questions for all of you. So without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. And since your written testimony has been made part of the record already, the subcommittee does request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. You will become familiar with this gavel at 5 minutes, and we try to keep things moving pretty quickly, efficiently to the 5 minutes in order to deal with some of the limitations of technology. But before we begin, I want to recognize Representative Brownlee of California to introduce our first witness. Representative Brownlee, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to be here this morning to introduce the Mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti. Los Angeles has always been at the forefront of the ever-evolving and ever-growing aviation and aerospace industry. In fact, many of the cities, communities, and suburbs were built around aviation companies' assembly factories. Coupled with factors like Angelino's pioneering spirit, the aviation and aerospace industry has continued to thrive in the region. For these reasons, you could not have chosen a better witness for today's hearing. Since he became mayor of Los Angeles in 2013, Mayor Garcetti has harnessed the city's sense of optimism and innovation. His forward-thinking and entrepreneurial spirit is especially evident in the city's embrace of advanced air mobility systems. The Southern California Metroplex, encompassing the airspace of most of Southern California and 6 major airports, is among the most complex aviation systems in the world. Yet Mayor Garcetti has not let that deter him from tackling this new frontier in aviation head on, including by working to integrate urban air mobility into the fabric of the city's transportation networks to provide new options for city residents and visitors. Along with other forms of zero-emission transportation, urban air mobility has the potential to help our region address its myriad of transportation challenges, from lessening congestion on our roads to reducing noise from older model helicopters and to eliminating carbon emissions from transportation sources. Mayor Garcetti understands that the United States must lead the way in developing this new technology so that our nation benefits from the incredible job growth that this emerging transportation sector will yield. He understands the incredible opportunities that urban air mobility can provide, not only for moving people, but for improving the movement of goods. As we examine this new frontier in aviation and aerospace, our region continues to lead the way. I thank the committee for inviting Mayor Garcetti to share his innovative aviation vision for Angelenos and for the nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Brownlee. Mayor Garcetti, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair Larson and Ranking Member Graves, all the members of the subcommittee and others who are here. And thank you to my dear friend, Julia Brownlee, Congress member. My mother should have been there for that introduction. It was so kind. And I am really pleased to be joined today in my testimony by Salita Reynolds, who is the General Manager of the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. You know, we have the 2nd largest metropolitan economy in the country and now the 3rd largest metropolitan economy in the world in Southern California. Home to the nation's busiest cargo complex. We boast the 3rd busiest passenger airport in the world, one of those 6 that was mentioned. But as you know, we're also a creative capital, an innovation capital, and the manufacturing capital of America. Our success is tied to America's strength, and America's success is tied to our strength. But LA also occupies another role, which is why it's such a treat to testify before you. We've become the transportation infrastructure investment capital of America, pouring $14 billion, the most of any airport in America, into LAX, which if you've been through in the last decade, you know needs it. Investing $120 billion, you heard that right, for 15 new public transit lines in preparation for the American Summer Games that will come to Los Angeles in 2028, part of the largest local transportation measure ever passed in American history ×2. And so we're trying to drive the future of transportation locally through investment and beyond as a testing ground for America's new innovation in transportation. And thanks to that history, geography, and ingenuity that Representative Brownlee mentioned, representatives and companies from everywhere are coming to Southern California to develop, to test, to build new transportation solutions. And that includes advanced aerial mobility, or AAM. For this technology, the sky is literally the limit, and it has the potential to reduce emissions, to connect communities, and to grow our economies. But as policymakers, I know that this hearing today is about our responsibility to step back, to assess the challenges, and to keep our focus on equity as this market takes off. We need to make sure that AAM doesn't create flyover highways accessible only to those with the economic means, but how we can explore AAM, estimated to travel between 50 and 200 miles an hour, between 50 and 200 miles at more than 150 miles an hour, could tie people to jobs and opportunity without creating more sprawl. We know that well in Los Angeles, where the traffic is among the worst in the country, and our air quality traditionally has been too, even though we've made huge strides. In the LA region, only a quarter of jobs are accessible within 90 minutes to people using public transit. AAM could offer a solution, but only if we build affordability, both into the private and public sector planning around this technology. So it needs to be safe, zero emissions, and low noise. We'll meet that standard, industry experts say, and be safer and cleaner than driving a car and quieter than a helicopter. And while there's no shortage of room in the air for AAM, there are far fewer spots available for takeoff and landing. So as we build out the infrastructure, we don't need to just think about the sky, but the buildings and the vertiports, and connect density and better connections to walking, cycling, and transit where those vertiports are. LA is already engaging Angelenos in our plans for AAM infrastructure because we want the public to be the co-authors of this. I'm proud that LA and our sister cities are leading on AAM, but we need your help at the federal level. Don't let us have 1,000 standards in 1,000 cities. Let's develop a national standard. Clear roles for managing low altitude airspace that recognize the responsibility, though, of local governments around land use, density, and development. 2, the FAA needs to prioritize research into safely integrating AAM into congested airspace, as well as research into how takeoffs and landings will weave into the flight paths of traditional commercial aircraft operations. 3, industry, the FAA, and local governments have to start sharing data on the safety, sustainability, equity, noise, and energy infrastructure impacts of AAM with one another, as well as members of the public, academic partners, and others. And 4, the FAA needs to speed up the pace of its data gathering and invest more resources in reliable communications, detect and avoid systems, and remote identification systems. And airports like LAX should be allowed to conduct pilot programs to test these types of systems. Last, we need funding to plan for and connect AAM infrastructure into our existing and future transportation networks. At its core, infrastructure isn't about a single mode of transportation. It's about innovation and jobs and human beings. It's about connecting communities. Whether it's AAM or encouraging more Americans to walk, ride, or take public transit, we have the tools to forge the next generation of transportation. LA, with cities around the world, is trying to develop this standard when it comes to AAM, and we simply need your partnership to arrive at that destination together. Thank you all so much. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. Appreciate your testimony. And now I'll turn to Mr. Grimsley. Mr. Grimsley, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves, thank you for inviting me to testify today. It is an honor to speak with you about the historic and exciting work underway within the Choctaw Nation to help safely advance drone technology into our national airspace system. In addition to serving as the Executive Director of Advanced Technology Initiatives with the Choctaw Nation, I also serve on the Board of Directors of the Commercial Drone Alliance. The efforts of our team have clearly demonstrated some of the quantifiable benefits to our own communities in using drone technology. Public safety and agriculture are particularly impactful applications for us. We're also finding that drones can reduce the risk of injury to workers, improve productivity, and assist first responders. In 2018, the Choctaw Nation made history by becoming the first and only tribal government to be selected by the U.S. Department of Transportation to participate in the Drone Integration Pilot Program, or IPP, as well as the first tribal government to be recognized by the FAA as a public aircraft operator. Last year, the Choctaw Nation was invited to continue our collaboration with the FAA as part of the Beyond program, which is focused on advancing beyond visual line of sight drone operations, as well as cargo delivery by drone. As part of these programs, we have been focused on community engagement with public stakeholders, which has been both productive and insightful. Our tribe has an interest in emerging technologies as a potential equalizer for rural and underserved communities. These advancements help communities such as ours make dramatic strides in improving overall quality of life. The technology that supports drones will continue to advance rapidly and in ways that enable the safe, efficient, secure, and environmentally responsible use of the airspace. The U.S. safety regulatory system for civil aviation has an enviable record of stewardship over the busiest and most complex aviation system in the world. But in order to sustain this vibrancy, our regulatory system needs to evolve to enable and support emerging technologies and new entrants into the airspace. Although we have made progress in the IPP and beyond in understanding how our regulatory system needs to evolve to integrate drones, our policies lag behind the pace of technological advances. This hinders the industry unnecessarily. Notwithstanding the best efforts of regulators to date, drone operations remain highly limited and reliant on a patchwork of unwieldy, one-off regulatory waivers rather than a stable and standardized regulatory foundation. Without regulatory modernization, the drone industry faces uncertainty that discourages investment and threatens the survival of innovative companies here in the United States. Unfortunately, our nation is at risk of losing our aviation leadership role in the world unless we take bold action to move into a better future that awaits. Drone technology continues to develop. but it is ready now to safely do more than has been enabled at this time. For communities like ours that have already made investments in safety infrastructure, drones can offer a more economical, cleaner, and safer alternative to surface transportation for mobility needs with applications such as cargo delivery by drone. Moreover, we have a relatively less busy and complex airspace for drone traffic to traverse. Since our geography and others like it entail relatively more benefits and relatively less air traffic complexity, regulators should be amenable to broadly enabling drone operations in locations such as ours. Our nation has long led the world in developing and safely deploying aviation technology. We are at risk of losing that leadership role with drones. A more conducive regulatory environment that enables the U.S. drone industry to scale would help build a stronger U.S. manufacturing base and research ecosystem, serving our country's economic, safety, and security interests. We simply cannot afford to have US-based companies move offshore to develop their technologies in more accommodating regulatory environments. We need continuing action and oversight by Congress to move forward so that communities such as ours can fully benefit from emerging transportation technologies. Our safety regulatory system needs specific mandates that clearly reflect the intent of Congress, and we need accountability of our safety regulatory system to achieve those mandates. Congress can begin by codifying and funding the FAA's Beyond program. We must ensure that the lessons we collectively learn from these pilot programs translate efficiently into permanent reform to our regulatory system. We believe the future is bright and that our quality of life can be enhanced by responsibly harnessing drone technology. But we need the federal government's support to ensure that these technologies flourish and provide the benefits to society that we know are possible. Thank you again for having me with you today, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Grimsley, thank you for your testimony. I'll now turn to Mr. Adam Bree of Skydio. Mr. Bree, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We meet at the dawn of a new era in flight. Electric propulsion and autonomy will transform aviation, and small drones are at the forefront. This new class of small electric drones will have a profound impact on our economy and our national security. The countries that lead the way will help to define this new era. Even though the drones are small, the stakes are high. For the recent past, the drone industry has been dominated by manually controlled drones that are hard to fly and easy to crash. 80% of these drones are made by companies based in China and come with a slew of cybersecurity concerns. Many have assumed it will always be this way. But much like the shift from flip phones to smartphones, the drone market is ripe for a transition from hardware-defined products to software-enabled solutions. And just as with phones, there is an opportunity for US companies to lead the way with the potential to create tens of thousands of jobs here in the US. I believe drones hold the promise of making our world dramatically better, safer, more creative, and more productive, and that the key to realizing that promise is making drones smart enough to fly themselves. That is why my co-founders and I started Skydio in 2014. Skydio is a software and artificial intelligence company. Our drones use computer vision and AI to build a real-time 3D map of the environment, avoid obstacles, and automate complex tasks. Thanks to an incredible team, we are now the largest US drone manufacturer and a world leader in autonomous flight. We've grown to employ hundreds of people across the country, but we're still small compared to the total opportunity. Having a strong domestic drone industry is important for our security, economy, and values. Once viewed as consumer toys, drones have become essential tools for a wide range of applications, including national defense and inspecting critical infrastructure. Our customers include roof inspectors that use drones to assess damage after storms, rather than climbing the roof and putting themselves in danger. Telecom inspectors use drones to create digital twins of cell phone and transmission towers while remaining safely on the ground. As one of our customers put it, when you use a drone for these inspections, you're not reducing an injury, you're reducing a death. We manufacture our drones in the US, building thousands per month. This gives us the fastest development times, the highest quality, and the highest levels of supply chain security. The more the market relies on American companies, the more jobs we will create in the United States, and the more we'll be able to trust drones to keep our data secure. We should also ensure that taxpayer funds support US jobs. For example, DoD's Blue UAS program has boosted the industry by relying on domestic drone companies like Skydio to equip our soldiers with the most advanced drone technology. Most importantly, the stronger the domestic drone industry, the more this technology will reflect democratic values. In 2020, Skydio became the world's first drone company to issue a set of ethical principles to guide our work. We consider the holistic impact of our products with particular focus on privacy and civil liberties. This committee is considering a generational investment in America's infrastructure. In addition to investing in the infrastructure itself, this committee has a profound opportunity to improve the way we maintain it. To ensure the safety of America's infrastructure, inspectors put themselves in harm's way by climbing towers, rappelling from bridges, and riding in gas-guzzling bucket trucks, which sometimes tip over. Drones revolutionize infrastructure inspection, getting better data with a fraction of the cost, risk, and carbon footprint. That is why almost every state Department of Transportation has started a drone program. Congress has an opportunity to capitalize on those benefits, including by enacting a grant program for infrastructure inspection. The program would enhance safety and efficiency by providing grants to state and local agencies to inspect America's highways and bridges with drones. It could also offer grants to educate workers on drone technology. Whether this new era of aviation is led by the US or other nations will depend on our regulatory approach. The key is to unlock the airspace from the ground up, enabling workers to inspect America's infrastructure with small, light drones flying low to the ground and beyond line of sight. These operations can be conducted safely now, as demonstrated by North Carolina DOT's groundbreaking statewide waiver to inspect bridges using Skydio drones. I am grateful to the committee for holding this hearing. Working together, we can ensure the United States leads this new era of aviation, providing extraordinary benefits for our economy, our security, and our infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Breed. Appreciate that very much. And now I want to turn to Mr. Harter. Mr. Harter, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Pierre Harter, and I'm Director of Research and Development for the National Institute for Aviation Research at Wichita State University. I'll start with some background. After dominating in the 20th century, the U.S. aerospace industry continues to be the world leader in this century as well. The gap has closed significantly in the commercial aviation sector, hastened by the pandemic and the MAX grounding. Significant competition remains and is growing. U.S. general aviation continues to slowly recover from the shock of the 2009 financial crisis and other factors, with significant consolidation in the sector and continued pressure from international competition. In the defense industry, the U.S. continues to maintain air dominance. The global arms race for unmanned aerial systems and hypersonics is well underway, spurring innovation that will impact the aerospace industry for years to come. The U.S. aerospace supply chain is still in a precarious position, recovering from multiple recent global shocks. In aerospace manufacturing, transformation was well underway and will accelerate as we emerge from the pandemic. This transformation has been both physical and digital across existing production lines, as well as sustainment of legacy fleets, incorporating new technologies and innovations in areas such as automation, digital engineering, industrial Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and other technologies. Now let's focus on the importance of innovation. Aviation has always been a source of innovation and inspiration, going back to the Wright brothers' first flight in 1903. In many ways, the next 2 decades hold the promise to transform our daily lives as significantly as that event did for the 20th century. Advanced aerial mobility and supersonic flight will create new travel paradigms and provide us with unprecedented global and local connectivity. Unmanned aerial systems technology will provide new and faster methods for delivering goods and services, transforming business to business and business to consumer transactions. Electric technologies will provide cleaner, quieter, and more efficient propulsion systems. Continued advancements in composite materials, additive manufacturing, and production system technologies will increase efficiency and reduce costs across all of aerospace. Safety must, of course, remain at the core of all aviation-related innovations, but must be balanced by enabling new technologies to enter the market efficiently, which inherently enhances safety. To remain the world leader in aerospace, the United States must continue to evolve and execute a strategic plan to create an environment that allows US-based companies to innovate and be first to market with these new technologies while maintaining safety and security. We must continue to embrace strong public-private partnerships to establish the strategic framework and shape the regulatory environment. In addition, we must invest in research and development that enables new designs, products, materials, and manufacturing technologies that enable US businesses to efficiently design, certify, and manufacture the most advanced air vehicles of the future. Wichita State University's National Institute for Aviation Research has a proven track record for supporting industry and government agencies in developing, certifying, and bringing new technologies to market, as well as preparing the workforce for the future. Since its inception in 1985, NIAR has made a name for itself as the most capable university-based aviation research center in the United States, providing research, design, testing, certification, and training to the aviation manufacturing industry. Government agencies, educational entities, and other clients that can benefit from our services. Because of NIAR's research efforts, Wichita State University currently ranks 4th among all U.S. universities in aeronautical R&D expenditures and 1st in industry funding for aeronautical expenditures, according to the National Science Foundation. NIAR's mission is to conduct research, transfer technology, and enhance education for the purpose of advancing the nation's aviation industry and to assist non-aviation industries that may benefit from aviation-related technologies. Some of NIAR's areas of expertise are additive manufacturing and prototyping, advanced manufacturing, composites and advanced materials, digital twinning, engineering design and modification, reverse engineering, robotics, and virtual engineering. NIAR also runs several centers and participates in initiatives that are strategically aligned with the Institute's capabilities and mission. NIAR centers promote the safety, research, manufacturing, and design elements of today's aviation industry. They strengthen their worthiness assurance in the short and long term. In conclusion, it is apparent that U.S. dominance in aerospace is a critical economic driver and a national security imperative. The next 2 decades promise exciting new aerospace innovations and products that will transform the way we live and work, enhancing the quality of life for Americans and the rest of the world. As in the past, the government must continue to support innovation by incorporating these new technologies into its strategic framework. Investment in R&D and capitalizing on industry, academia, and government partnerships will enable safe, secure, and efficient introduction of these new technologies and products. WSU and NIAR look forward to continue working with industry and government to conduct research, transfer technology, and enhance education for the purpose of advancing the nation's aerospace industry. I appreciate the opportunity to testify and would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Harter, for your testimony. I'll now turn to Mr. Roy Gonzarski from the great state of Washington, and what some say is is the best district in the country, the 2nd district of Washington State. About 700,000 people say that, in fact. So, Mr. Gonzarski, I'll recognize you for 5 minutes, and good to see you.
Good morning, Chairperson Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and esteemed committee members. My name is Roy Gonzarski, and I'm the CEO of MagniX. Headquartered in the great city of Everett, Washington, we design and manufacture all-electric propulsion systems for commercially focused aircraft. Before I begin, I wanted to express what an honor this is for me to be testifying here. I came to this country 24 years ago in pursuit of an education and found a home, a haven to raise a family in, and a flourishing environment to work in. The American dream is alive and well, and I thank you for that. Accessible, affordable, equitable, environmentally clean, quieter. This is the aviation future we should be striving for in the United States, a future that offers all Americans the ability to fly in convenient door-to-door fashion without causing harm. In this future, the average American only drives a short distance to an airport, arrives 15 minutes before their flight, boards without hassles, and flies up to a few hours. This sounds like a utopia, but for the most part, the technologies and infrastructure to do this exist or are being developed and flight proven as I speak. It's called the electric age of aviation. On the world stage, the U.S. has always been a leader. Be it economics, culture, or technology, the world looked to us as a beacon for the future. However, with aviation, our country is falling short of our reputation for pioneering innovation and leading industry. In Europe, countries are pledging domestic flights be electric by 2030, banning short flights that produce emissions, and providing hundreds of millions of dollars to advance carbon-free aviation. As the home of the Wright brothers in Apollo 11, our legacy of asking why not demands ambitious, aspirational, and forward-thinking action. Electric aircraft will have significantly lower operating costs stemming from cheap electricity and significantly less maintenance needs. This means operators can provide much more affordable services using smaller aircraft flying from and to smaller airports, all with significantly lower noise and zero emissions. We can truly connect all of America by air and do so cleanly. Doing this will require us to be bold as President Kennedy was when he announced the dramatic and ambitious goal of sending an American safely to the moon. Like conquering the moon, commercial electric aviation is an audacious goal, one that will require determination, focus, and grit, and that will compel us to put our best minds to work and make sacrifices as we make advances. We have everything we need here in the United States. magniX, for example, has been flying all-electric commercially focused aircraft since December of 2019. And our FAA certification, Part 33, is on track for 2022, which means there's a real possibility that smaller all-electric aircraft can start flying at people and packages on short routes within the next 4 years. It will not be easy, but let's not forget that we didn't reach the moon in one attempt or one stage. Expecting electric aviation to power a 737-sized aircraft as it flies across the country is not reasonable at this stage. We must start with smaller aircraft flying shorter routes from and to smaller airports. As investments are made, policies are set, incentives introduced, and technologies progress, we will advance to larger and longer distances. With the current state of technology, our President and Congress should set a bold and ambitious goal of having all electric aircraft start to perform commercial flights up to 250 miles by the end of 2024 and up to 1,000 miles by 2030. Doing this will also lead to thousands of clean jobs across the country. Congress needs to provide incentives for operators to adopt electric aircraft for existing and new routes, incentives for airports to invest in charging capabilities, and incentives for manufacturers to develop all-electric aviation solutions. These incentives can include grants, tax credits, and more. I also propose amending the Essential Air Service, a taxpayer program, by adding an environmental performance criterion to be awarded subsidies. Separately, I'll share that the FAA is doing an amazing job working with the right attitude and approach with these new technologies, but they're lacking resources. I highly recommend more funding for the FAA to hire and train more people in electric aviation. I will conclude by shamelessly paraphrasing President Kennedy, because his words are as relevant and accurate today as they were for the space race in 1962. We choose to transition to electric aviation within the next 4 years, not because it is easy, but because it is hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. Thank you for the opportunity to share my insights. The United States must seize the moment and lead. magniX is proud to be a part of returning the American aviation industry to preeminence and global leadership with the electric age of aviation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzarski. Appreciate that very much. And I want to turn to Mr. Blake Scholl, founder and CEO of Boom Supersonic. Mr. Scholl, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. I'd like to start by recognizing and reflecting on why flying is so moving. Even though air travel has now become routine, it affords opportunities and experiences that were just unfathomable a few generations ago. And we get to enjoy all of this while miles up in the air at hundreds of miles an hour, while having a breathtaking view of the Earth. 60 years before the early jets, crossing the Atlantic took 6 days, and the jet shrank that to just 7 hours. But today, we can't travel any faster than we could 60 years ago. So Chair Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee, I'm grateful for the opportunity today to discuss the coming renaissance of safe, sustainable, and affordable supersonic flight. Since the 1950s, the jet airplane has defined so much of our modern lives. Thanks to the speed of the jet, places like Hawaii are now major tourist destinations. Musicians can give world tours, and entrepreneurs can reach customers around the globe. And our leaders can gather frequently in person to build relationships and diffuse crises. At Boom, we want to unlock new possibilities for human connection and for business. We have 3 guiding principles: safety, sustainability, and speed. Our first supersonic commercial airplane, Overture, is designed to facilitate net zero carbon travel. Aboard Overture, London would be just 3.5 hours from New York, and Sydney becomes as accessible as Honolulu is today. Overture, along with the other emerging technologies represented here today, are going to be key pillars of the future transportation ecosystem. Someday, you might take an electric taxi to the airport, board a supersonic jet, and then cross the planet at twice today's speeds. More seamless point-to-point travel makes for a more connected world. At Boom, we've been building a strong safety culture from day one. Developing our piloted supersonic demonstrator, the XB-1, has helped us build a safety-first mindset early on and to develop our safety management system well ahead of Overture's assembly. We are also taking great care to ensure that speed and sustainability are compatible goals. This is a deep part of our culture, and our team is working diligently to maximize efficiency and minimize noise in Overture's design. Crucially, Overture will meet the same stringent noise levels that are applicable to the latest generation subsonic jets. We understand the importance of community engagement, and we plan to undertake such outreach well ahead of Overture's entry into service. And because Overture will fly at supersonic speeds over water only, we will not be creating sonic booms over communities. Sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF, are key to Overture sustainability. And we're designing Overture from the ground up to run on 100% SAF, enabling net zero carbon flight. Lastly, we plan to use and support high quality carbon offsets, including new generation carbon removal technologies where necessary to meet our net zero commitments. Additionally, we're excited to be working with the United States Air Force on potential military applications of our aircraft. For example, carrying leaders across the world in half the time, evacuating wounded soldiers to medical care in time to save lives, and transporting life-saving emergency supplies to where they are urgently needed. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Congress, and especially this committee, for your leadership in passing the bipartisan FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018. Through this act, Congress helped drive important regulatory work in support of new innovation. And indeed, the FAA's work at the International Civil Aviation Organization is critical. Regulatory certainty is vital to our success, and ICAO must continue to advance economically reasonable, technologically feasible, and environmentally beneficial standards for supersonic aircraft. In the field of SAF, policy incentives will also be critical to accelerating production and adoption. At Boom, we support measures such as blender tax credits to accelerate SAF production, and we're working with a broad coalition of SAF stakeholders to advance that policy. Boom is proud that Overture will be designed and assembled in the United States, leveraging the formidable talent, entrepreneurial spirit, and tradition of innovation in our workforce. Faster travel will offer many benefits to society, and I'm grateful that Congress continues to show leadership in aviation innovation. Thank you for having me here today, and of course, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scholl, and I want to thank all the witnesses for sticking to 5 minutes or under. I appreciate that. It might be a record. We're going to go back and spend some staff time and look at that, and so I appreciate that very much from folks. I also want to thank the staff on both sides of the aisle for putting together an excellent panel for us. I did think this was going to be a fairly interesting and somewhat exciting hearing based on what I plan to hear, and I think I can say ahead of time before we get to questions that this is giving us a lot to think about on the committee as we move forward in aviation. So I really want to thank the panelists for that. We're now going to move to 5 minutes for members, 5 minutes each for member questions. I'm going to start by recognizing myself for questions. And next, if Mr. Graves, he had to step away. If he is not back, I think Mr. Massey will be next. That'll be the first Republican up unless Mr. Graves comes back. So if Mr. Massey can be ready. So I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. First question is for Mayor Garcetti. Could you elaborate specifically on the elements the FAA should include in vertiport standards to meet the needs of densely populated areas? It's a question that we are taking a look at on the committee. So specific elements the FAA should look at in terms of vertiport standards to meet the needs of densely populated areas. Mayor?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just think you have to co-author this and write it with the community. Access is critically important, especially when it comes to private buildings. And looking at ways that the FAA can create a national standard, but also respect local zoning, local land use, and figure out a way to give that sort of flexibility on the ground and listen to the co-authorship of this with local communities as well. Salita, I don't know if you want to add anything to that real quick, because I know the members don't have a lot of time, but anything else you'd add?
I would just say consideration for integration with existing transit systems, as well as noise and redundancy. So do we have a large enough footprint to make sure that there are alternate landing and takeoff locations if something happens with the first one?
Yeah, and then a follow-up, Mayor Garcetti, how are you thinking about equitable access for residents using AAM?
Well, you know, we've developed something called Principles of the Urban Sky, or the other POTUS, as I call it. But Principles of the Urban Sky really looks at the ways that we can make sure that whatever we do in Los Angeles, that we have a public process to kind of co-author that we look at the links with our public transit system so that it's seen as connecting to a system rather than existing above it, and making sure that there are kind of the stakeholders from underrepresented communities, lower income communities, commuter communities that often, have been bypassed when it comes to cutting edge technology. They should be the first to benefit, as well as folks of other communities. So we're looking at putting that together and probably having a task force while we develop a standard that wouldn't be just good for Los Angeles, but a playbook that hopefully folks from around the world can do. And we're doing that together with the World Economic Forum.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. It's great food for thought. Mr. Gonzarski, regarding MagniX, you talked about in your testimony, you've got the e-Beaver and the e-Caravan, 5 to 6 person and 9 to 12 person. What is the limiting technological challenge to get to something larger, a platform that's larger, say, than a 12-seater Caravan?
You're right. Right now, the limiting factor is sources of energy, meaning batteries and or hydrogen fuel cells. With that said, today's batteries are enough, as you mentioned, to take a 6 to 9 passenger aircraft up to 500 miles. And hydrogen fuel cells are good enough to take a 40 passenger aircraft up to 500 miles. That's a project we're doing with Universal Hydrogen converting a Dash 8. And so in the next 10 to 15 years, I would say that 40 to 70 passengers will be the max size you see, and up to about 500 miles in range. By the time we get to 2030, having 1,000-mile ranges with 100 passenger aircraft should not be a problem.
We'll make a note of that and check up in 9 years with you on that one. You noted in your testimony, Mr. Gonzarski, that 23% of your workforce are women, 27% are minorities. Is MagniX doing anything specific to attract and hire a workforce that's more reflective of the nation's diversity?
Yes, we intentionally and with purpose look for both women and minorities in the roles that we have. This is a challenging industry. Aerospace is a tough industry to find good diversity in because they just don't exist. And that starts at middle school and high school. Not enough women go into engineering, not enough minorities go into engineering. And so when you want to hire someone today in 2021, the pool is much smaller. So you have to intentionally do that. Starting at middle school and high school programs, we go to campuses to look for women. We do internships. And then when we look at resumes, we specifically try to focus on minorities and women in this industry so that we can propel them up. But it's not an easy task.
Thank you. I want to touch on that with Mr. Grimsley. Given your focus on improving the visibility of drone research and testing among the K-12 Choctaw Nation students, how can the federal government, or should the federal government, support the Choctaw Nation's efforts to encourage its students to pursue STEM and aerospace careers?
Well, thank you very much for that question. It's a very important question. And I agree with the previous witness that, we need to reach the children at younger ages. That's when they develop the passion and when they have the ability to have a sense of confidence that STEM is something that they can do, a career in engineering is something they can do. I believe the things that Congress is doing right now in terms of broadband build out, including STEM education as part of things like the FAA reauthorization are all important. But I think more opportunities for partnerships. We have a great partnership with NASA where we do a lot of STEM related camps for our Choctaw youth. So more opportunities where we can work with agencies so that we can reach some of these underserved students in some of these areas. The Choctaw Nation has really historically been an impoverished area. The tribe has made a huge impact on the quality of life and economic opportunity, but we are still an emerging area. So one of the big things that we are working on STEM at that younger age, when we're looking at middle school and all the way through high school, is something very important to us, even as part of beyond in our previous IPP efforts. So I think that thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I need to cut myself off. And with that, I'll just double check if Mr. Graves is available. Okay, then we'll move to Representative Massey of Kentucky. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Larson, for having this hearing. Mr. Bree, since we share an alma mater, I want to start with you. Also, I was very disturbed by the state of our drone manufacturing and the small market share that we have. What are the biggest challenges that you see for drone manufacturers in the United States? Why is China so dominant? And what can we do, if anything, in Congress to sort of change the playing field or level it out?
Well, thank you, Representative, for that question. I think it's a really important issue. So there's some history to this. I grew up flying radio-controlled airplanes, which was kind of my on-ramp into the industry. And the U.S. had a thriving and still has a thriving hobbyist community, which I think is really important. But most of those RC airplanes, RC toys, were manufactured in China. And I think that is actually one of the reasons why China got out to an early lead, because there's kind of been this blending of the hobbyist industry into what is now the drone industry. I think the most important thing to recognize is that we're still very early. The technology is in its infancy, so there's tremendous opportunity. Ultimately, the way that we win is by having better products. And I think the way that we have better products is by focusing on the stuff that we're good at. So at Skydio, we focused on autonomy and AI. We think that's the future of the industry. And we're winning head to head with customers across basically every segment based on the strength of that AI and autonomy. From Congress's standpoint, I think there's a few things to consider. The US public sector represents a really significant customer base for drones, from state departments of transportation to DOT to public safety. And the more that taxpayer dollars are going to support US companies, the stronger the US industry is going to be. So legislation like the American Security Drone Act, which is primarily concerned with security of drones, will also help promote US industry. And I also think doubling down on the stuff that's working. So using drones for infrastructure inspection. This is a use case that has tremendous public good. There's an opportunity to provide grant funding to increase that and help state departments of transportation stand up stuff that's working. You heard this in a number of the opening statements as well. The regulatory environment matters a huge amount. We need to have regulations that support autonomous flight, because that's really the future of the industry.
Well, let me ask you about that. As you well know, I'm sure there were 50 UAS provisions in the last FAA authorization. How is that going at the FAA? We need a robust domestic end user market for drones in order to have robust manufacturing, I believe. So how are they doing on that, and what can we do?
Again, I very much appreciate the question. I mean, I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. So one of the things that we've really benefited from the last FAA reauthorization was what's called the 44807 provision. So there's kind of this, small Part 107, if you have a pilot, if they're flying within visual line of sight, that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is full type certification, which is designed primarily for crewed aircraft at a much larger scale. And there's kind of this missing middle, which 44807 begins to fill, where it's a lighter weight, faster process to certify autonomous aircraft for routine operation. I think we need a lot more of that. The FAA seems to be kind of backing away from this. I think we need to double down on things like that. And one of the other areas that was called out in the reauthorization, which I think is really important to continue with, is investment in education, because that's really where all of this starts. That's, we're hiring from the pool of talent that comes from our educational system. And I think that's ultimately the future.
Mr. Scholl, I'm really excited about the prospect of civilians flying supersonic again, and especially if those routes will start from the United States. Can you tell us how far away we are, Mr. Scholl, from civilians flying supersonic, and what's the first route you're going to focus on?
Thank you. Yes, super exciting. We're going to have passengers on board before the end of the decade. To give you a little bit of a sense of the timeline, our XB-1 supersonic demonstrator, which is history's first independently developed supersonic jet and the first new civil supersonic aircraft since the Soviets did it in 1968. That airplane is going to fly around the end of this year, early next year, start to set some speed records. We're breaking ground next year on the factory for our Overture airliner. We're going to start building the first one in 23. It's going to roll out of the factory in 25 and begin flight tests in 26. So we are just 5 years away from having the first American-made supersonic airliner in our skies. And that is tremendously exciting. As far as which routes we're going to focus on, that's really up to our airline customers. But you're going to see supersonic first on the routes that are transoceanic. So think New York to London in 3.5 hours. Think LA to Sydney in 8 hours. Think being able to get from the US to Asia an entire day faster than it takes today. You can leave a day later, sleep at home before you have to leave. It's super, super exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Larson. Has my time expired?
I'm sorry, your time's expired.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Massey. Next up, we have Representative Carson, who will be followed by Representative Mast. Representative Carson, of Indiana, you're recognized for 5 minutes. I'll just wait for a hint from the staff about sound. You seem to be muted, Mr. Carson, Representative Carson.
Yes, sir.
There you go. Representative Carson, recognized for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. You know, I'm preparing to reintroduce my bipartisan bill with Don Young, the National Center for the Advancement of Aviation. It would effectively support and promote collaboration among civil, commercial, and military aviation sectors to address the demands and challenges associated with ensuring a safe and vibrant national aviation system through research, education, and training. To the panel, what do you think about this kind of center that would effectively go across silos of so many different aviation sectors and build up our American aviation industry? Is this too ambitious? What are your thoughts?
Mr. Carson, this is the chair. Could you identify a specific person to ask that of, please?
Let's start with the good mayor. I think he's passionate about aviation.
Absolutely. I would welcome it, Congressman. I think it's absolutely critical. And as we look at infrastructure packages that you'll be considering, having these national centers to both test and develop. I think of the high desert where the B-2 bomber, Northrop, Skunk Works, others have for a long time helped develop the aerospace innovation that's helped us win wars and keep the peace. Right now, where there's a drone technology and transportation technology being focused, I think for all of us, it would be welcome to see that sort of investment. We can't take for granted that it will just happen. I think the best of public-private partnerships are the public funding to see this research be accelerated and then the private sector to spin it off, as we've seen in this country from everything from the internet to the aerospace breakthroughs we've made in the past. So I would absolutely welcome it, and I'd probably lobby to put it here, but since my wife's from Indiana, I'd settle for Indiana too.
Those Hoosiers ties run deep. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
I could throw in a couple cents here. You know, I am not familiar with this specific proposal, but I think we're really onto something here with the importance of innovation at the intersection of different technologies. You know, especially as we think about the future of advanced air mobility, supersonic flight, how that intersects with our infrastructure, bringing together airports, airlines, aircraft manufacturers, including new kinds, and thinking about how we can more fluidly move around the planet is going to be a major opportunity for innovation.
I'd be happy to add to that as well, in that I think the center would really have to focus on what is the deliverable and what do you call success? Is it about R&D? Is it about bringing practical solutions to market? How do you know the center has been successful, and how do you measure it?
That's good. Very good. Thank you all. I yield back, Chairman. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Recognize Representative Mast for 5 minutes, who will be followed by Representative Davids. Representative Mast for 5 minutes from Florida. Sorry, we're going to skip ahead. I apologize. Representative Balderson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I appreciate everyone joining us today. My first question is going to go to Mr. Scholl. Mr. Scholl, I have had the opportunity to visit NASA's Glenn Research Center, which is located in Cleveland, Ohio, outside of my district, but within a 2-hour drive. So one of the many great projects they are working on with their state-of-the-art wind tunnels is developing a prototype Quite Boom supersonic aircraft. Has your company collaborated with NASA or other federal agencies on researching this technology or delivering a commercial product?
Well, thank you very much for the question. You know, to be clear, with Overture 1, we are starting focusing on routes that are over water only for supersonic flight. So the question of quiet boom and sonic boom over communities is not something we're addressing in Overture 1. However, I am very excited about the work happening at NASA Glenn with the Quest program and elsewhere about developing the technologies that will ultimately enable supersonic flight unrestricted everywhere. And you know, I think that is certainly part of the future.
Thank you. Is there anything Congress can do to ensure some of the federal research to help the commercial aerospace?
I think that's a great question. I think we're on a good track with Quest. I think one of the things that would be important sort of guidance in the regulatory process is balancing sustainability, balancing affordability, and balancing what is an appropriate acceptable noise level for communities. Sometimes those goals can be in tension, and having to balance on making supersonic flight acceptable for everybody, affordable for everybody, is going to be huge to enabling that next generation of high-speed flights everywhere for everybody.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. Harter. Mr. Harter, thank you for joining this morning. Also, what do you believe the best practices are for federal research collaboration with entities like your university? And how can Congress best support your work with and ensure that federal agencies are collaborating with researchers on the university level?
Thank you for the question, sir. Appreciate the opportunity. So I think, NIAR's got a long history of being able to cross those intersections and bring together all the different stakeholders, the government, the industry, academia, to collaborate on different research projects, as well as to inform and help write new regulations and policy. So I think the federal government should continue to invest in research opportunities, as well as policy and guidance making and centers that create those intersections. And I think Wichita State's very well poised to do that, as are other institutions in the U.S.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back my remaining time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Representative. I now recognize Representative Davids, after which will be Representative Van Drew. Representative Davids, you are from Kansas, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for taking the time to join us today, especially Mr. Harter, who's coming from the Sunflower State and serving on today's panel. Thank you so much. I also really want to just kind of note how much I appreciate the chairman and ranking member for holding the hearing that we're having today. This is a chance for us to look forward and evaluate the opportunities that exist that are frankly really exciting in the U.S. aerospace sector. And of course, one area of particular interest for me is advanced air mobility, or AAM, as folks often refer to it as. Because these air transportation systems hold a lot of potential to integrate into existing airspace operations, whether we're talking about local and regional, rural, urban, passenger, cargo. I think we're hearing about all of that today. And I think a lot of folks would love to imagine a future where you can hop on board a small electric vertical takeoff vehicle in the middle of an urban environment or city environment like Kansas City, and then fly a really, manageable distance. What would normally take maybe 45 minutes to commute now only would take 10 or 15 minutes. And it's obvious that future is not really that far off. And I've had the chance to visit with some of the companies that are working on this exciting technology. And I know that now is the time for us to be engaged in this from the congressional level. And this is actually one of the reasons that Ranking Member Garrett Graves and I have introduced HR 1339, the Advanced Air Mobility Coordination and Leadership Act. We're going to come up with a nice little acronym for that for everybody. But this is a simple bill that's got some pretty common sense stuff in it, directing the DOT to establish a Advanced Air Mobility Interagency Working Group. And, that includes executive agencies, labor, public and private stakeholders, which we've heard are going to be so important to this. And then, of course, there's obviously the infrastructure, security, cybersecurity. But when we're talking about an industry that's predicted to be like a $1.5 trillion industry, we need to make sure that we're taking this really seriously. And that's for everybody here in states like Kansas and all across the country. So I want to start off actually with a question to Mayor Garcetti. Mayor, I know you all have already started to prepare for an AAM-enabled future. with your mobility plan for 2035. You have a working group established, and I'm curious, what questions and answers do you think that other cities need to be looking at when they're evaluating the future of AAM?
Well, thank you, Representative Davids, and thank you to you and to Ranking Member Graves for the AAM Leadership and Coordination Act. I think it's a really important piece of legislation to have introduced. We're looking at a few different things and trying to do this in conjunction, not just with other cities, but rural tribal areas as well as having this conversation outside the United States to see what sort of global standards might be developed, though I think America should lead on these. Obviously, it's the sharing of data in a way that's open source as much as possible for stakeholders to be able to see that and understand the space that we all own collectively. We're looking at things like affordability, how much do these rides actually cost if they were in an urban area. Of course, the planning issues that I mentioned about land use, but also the distribution of vertiports. Are they equal in different communities? It's like broadband. This will be something for rural communities to consider, as well as poorer neighborhoods in urban areas, the noise and visual pollution. And then lastly, the jobs, from the manufacturing all the way to the passenger experience. What sort of standards do we want to establish for these jobs and opportunities for folks who are underserved and economically don't have as many advantages?
Yeah, I appreciate the, particularly when it comes to the up and downstream, both the jobs and also making sure that our suppliers are, taken care of. And in Kansas, where we've got both up and downstream suppliers, I'm keenly aware of how important that can be. And one last thing I wanted to.
If Representative could wrap, your 5 minutes is up.
Okay. Sorry. I just want to thank you to the Choctaw Nation for all the innovative work that you all have been doing. I meant to say that earlier.
Thank you.
All right, great, thanks. Little change up here, and we're going to recognize Ranking Member Garrett Graves from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I love that we're talking about advanced technologies, and apparently my internet was not solid in the first opening statement, but I think we got that fixed. In any case, I want to follow up on a question I believe Mr. Massey asked, and if I could ask Mr. Bree. We've seen a lot of problems with supply chain and perhaps dependence upon supply chain from China that's problematic. We've seen the percentage of the drone market share. Could you talk a little bit? Congress is especially concerned about this increased reliance upon them for batteries, for technology, for components. Can you talk a little bit about the current status of domestically sourced components for and supply lines and why you think that's important?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the question, Representative Graves. I think this is a really, really important issue, and it's something that we think a lot about at Skydio. So most of the most critical components on our drone are coming from US companies. The two major processors that we use are coming from NVIDIA and Qualcomm, both US companies. Wherever we can, we're sourcing stuff from US companies or allied nations. And there are a lot of great components out there. We were actually the first commercial customer for a company called Aerospace Composites that has a really innovative composite technology, which is a critical component for our latest enterprise drone. So I think there's a lot of good stuff happening. I think it's also important to recognize that these things take time, and there are certainly areas where there just are not US alternatives. I think there's a lot of innovation and a lot of good things happening. I think everybody kind of recognizes that there's opportunity and need here. It's just going to take a little bit of patience to get there. But I think a lot of positive things are happening.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Harter. One of the things the subcommittee has been focusing a good bit of time on, and I know the chairman shares concerns, is on cybersecurity threats with as it relates to aerospace, and certainly with new generations of technologies before us, this whole threat evolves. Could you talk a little bit about sort of how you see the current threat and what we need to be thinking about as policymakers and some of those on the Zoom in terms of innovators?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the question. Cybersecurity is paramount concern in all new technologies. Aerospace, of course, is getting more and more connected. Not only in the technology of the aircraft or the air vehicles themselves, but in the technology that helps those air vehicles navigate our pathways. So we need to spend a lot of time and have a lot of concern and spend research and make sure our workforce is ready to support the cybersecurity of not just the air vehicle itself, but the systems that support those and help them fly around our nation and across the world. Does that answer your question, sir?
It does. Thank you. And I think this is an area where we need to continue being very thoughtful and vigilant and ensure that we keep it on the front burner. Mr. Bree, if I can go back to you, the FAA has done a number of rulemakings and a number of initiatives to integrate drones into the national airspace, IPP, beyond unmanned traffic management systems and others. Can you talk a little bit, again, I know the chairman mentioned this, I mentioned it in opening as well. We've got to make sure that all of these efforts are coming together to ensure that we are efficiently and safely integrating drones into the national airspace. Could you just talk a little bit about how you see these things coming together?
Yeah, again, I think it's a great question, and I think this committee and the FAA deserve a lot of credit for the work that's been done. We've benefited quite a bit from the integration pilot program, the IPP. It's gotten us connected to end users. We've gotten some breakthrough waivers for low altitude beyond visual line of sight. The most important thing, I think, is using that momentum to create repeatable operational stuff that goes beyond these pilot programs and gets codified into actual scalable regulations. And thanks to the pilot programs, I think we now have a lot of data that suggests and shows the kinds of operations that can be done safely. So I think we've got a lot of the pieces we need. We just need to make sure that we keep the momentum and turn those into actual scalable operational standards.
Great, thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Graves. I now recognize for 5 minutes Representative Kahele of Hawaii. Representative Kahele.
Hey, thank you so much, Chair, and aloha, everyone. It's great to be on this hearing today. And as a pilot, a lifelong pilot, I'm really excited about some of the really innovative things that we're talking about. And my first question goes to Mr. Scholl from Boom, and I had a great opportunity to read your testimony, and I had something that popped out of me, and I wanted to ask you a question on. You mentioned in your testimony that Overture, the supersonic aircraft, which looks very similar to the Concorde, but obviously from your testimony, there's much greater technological advancement in this type of aircraft. But you noted that the Overture will, due to noise, would only fly supersonic speeds over the water. And so my question was, it makes a lot of sense when you're flying from New York to London or Japan to Hawaii, but how would that work flying from Los Angeles to New York if we're limited to flying right under the speed of sound?
Great question. Really appreciate it. The reality is we're going to see supersonic travel coming to market in a couple phases. And that first phase is to be focused on supersonic flight over water. So fortunately, Hawaii is one of those places that super benefit from it, since right in the middle of a lot of water. But of course, we want to get from say Seattle to Washington D.C. faster than we get from Seattle to Tokyo. And so there's going to be, I think, a second generation here, possibly some supersonic corridors that would allow high-speed flight over land. And then what we really need to have this be mainstream everywhere is global standards for supersonic flight over land, understanding what's going to be an acceptable level of noise over communities that doesn't create disruption. And then once we have those standards, once you have that certainty, we know we can build aircraft that meet it, but we can't do that in phase one because we don't know what we need to do. So it's that regulatory certainty that's really the holding it back.
All right, thank you for that. Second question is in regards to the SAF reductions in carbon emissions and the types of fuels and technology and research we're doing to build aircraft that are more energy efficient, more carbon neutral, and ones that can help us contribute to a cleaner environment. Can you talk a little bit about that part of your testimony and what Boom is doing and Overture is doing to do R&D into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's super, super important to us. And we believe deeply that the airplane that you most want to be on from a comfort perspective, from a convenience perspective, from a speed perspective, also needs to be the one that's best for the planet. And historically, we've seen those things in conflict, but they really don't need to be. And I think there's great inspiration that we can take from what Tesla has accomplished in automotive. Before Tesla, you didn't want an electric vehicle. They were slow. They didn't go very far. They weren't fun to drive. And then they showed us that we could build an electric car that's great to drive and is best for the planet. And so that's the kind of vision that inspires us in Overture. And so the question is, well, how do you do it? You can't do it with electricity, not anytime soon, because batteries are simply too heavy for a long range flight. You'll run out of charge before you get to your destination. So what you need is sustainable aviation fuel, which is chemically very similar to today's jet fuels, but can come from completely carbon neutral sources. So there are a bunch of ways we can do this. There are biofuels. There are fuels that are based on municipal waste. There are fuels that are based in carbon sequestration. And we're designing Overture from the ground up to be the first commercial airliner that's going to run on 100% SAF. And that's super important to us as a design goal. Now, the biggest challenge, and I think this is where there's a opportunity for this committee and for Congress to provide some leadership, is that the supply chain for sustainable aviation fuel for SAF needs to be scaled. And today, the technologies exist, but they're not scaled up yet. So we need things like producer tax credits, R&D around SAF and how we scale that so that it is not just technologically feasible, but available in large quantities and available on terms that are economically competitive.
Thank you so much for that. And mahalo, Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to recognize Representative Steele of California. Just a heads up that Representative Williams from Georgia will follow Representative Steele. Representative Steele, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves. I'm happy to have the opportunity today to hear from the witnesses about the advances of the aerospace industry is making through research and innovation for the future of American air transportation. I have the honor of representing coastal Orange County, California in Congress. My district is home to John Wayne Airport. The airport is located between the cities of Costa Mesa, Irvine, and Newport Beach, and serve more than 3 million people within 34 cities and unincorporated areas of Orange County. In 2019, approximately 10.7 million passengers flew through John Wayne Airport. The residents of Orange County and of my district care a lot about our airport. In addition to the convenience of having a world-class airport close to home, my constituents are also deeply concerned about the impacts noise and pollution have on our community. I am very encouraged by the innovations that the witnesses have presented today. They show the private sector innovation is the driver for new, cleaner, and quieter air travel. But I know the new technologies such as electric airplanes have been part of the discussion for quite some time. I believe the federal government has an important role to play in cutting red tape and providing a regulatory environment where new technology can be approved for use safely, yet avoid the pitfalls of using taxpayers' dollars to pick winners and losers. I'm happy to be a member of the Quiet Skies Caucus and to work here in Congress to help reduce noise and pollution from air travel. I believe the best way to do this is create a fair playing field where innovation can flourish and airlines, manufacturers, and travelers can make the best choice for their businesses and, most importantly, for the health and well-being of their passengers and the communities in which they operate. So having said that, I want to ask Mr. Ganzarski, can you share more about the current market for electric aircraft and about what barriers are to transitioning to this more clear and more efficient technology?
Thank you very much. John Wayne Airport is a great example of a regional airport in the middle of a dense population. Imagine being able to fly in and out of John Wayne Airport with an aircraft that produces 100 times less noise energy, 20% less decibels, and do so at zero emissions. That completely changes the landscape. Now imagine that aircraft costs 40 to 80% less per hour to operate. How many more people in and around John Wayne Airport can now have access to flying? The fact is that most flights in the United States are less than 500 miles in range, which means that battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric aircraft, even small ones, can today serve a large amount of demand. We will start, because of battery density and fuel cell density, we will start with small aircraft, 6, 9, 12, 40 passengers, flying to and from smaller airports in distances of 250 to 500 miles. But that will open up access and equity at cost and cleanliness of levels that have never existed before. And so the market is very strong for it. Now we have to incentivize the move forward.
So your testimony include a request for incentives for manufacturers that make electric aircrafts. So can you share how to see electric aircraft competing without taxpayer subsidies?
So it wouldn't have to be even taxpayer subsidies. Imagine carbon credits. So there's now this discussion about having carbon credits for synthetic aviation fuels. What if it was also for electric? If you use an aircraft or are manufacturing an aircraft that pollutes the environment, you can offset those with credits towards an aircraft or a propulsion system manufacturer that does so with completely clean technology. And so those types of incentives and subsidies, if we call them that, will encourage other manufacturers and other aerospace companies to go more electric.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. The chair now recognizes Representative Williams of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Larson, for convening this hearing, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. It's critical that we make investments into aeronautics research. We have some of the best scientists and researchers at NASA working with the FAA on advanced air mobility. What was once thought of as futuristic or something from the Jetsons will be our reality in no time. With all of the forms of transportation, safety is one of the top things that we need to ensure. Mayor Garcetti, I represent the city of Atlanta, and we're similar to the city of Los Angeles in many ways. Both cities are urban areas. Both have very large, busy airports, some of the busiest in the world, and have extreme vehicle congestion. As we move to implement AAM, what safety regulations and standards do you believe the federal, state, and local government should have in place to ensure that residents in urban areas that are high density are safe?
Mayor Garcetti, you seem to be on mute.
Sorry, thanks so much, Representative Williams. We have a real expert here who not only serves on the FAA Drone Advisory Committee, but who has been trying to help us hear what some of these things might even sound like in an urban environment. So I'm going to ask Salita Reynolds to answer that with your indulgence, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Williams, for the question. And I was born in Atlanta, so it has a place in my heart forever. I just want to share that, like Atlanta, Los Angeles is a city that has suffered a legacy impacts of where freeways are and how they really box Black and brown neighborhoods and low-income neighborhoods out of opportunity. And as we consider where we're going to locate vertiports, we want to consider equity of impacts. We want to make sure that we don't double down on those same legacy impacts of the past. And that means we have to consider safety, which means that while the industry wants to innovate and lean forward, that probably should not happen over urban areas. But we also want to consider noise impacts. And in Los Angeles, we've actually built a sound lab where residents can come in and stand on the corner of a different part of Los Angeles touch, feel, and hear what it might sound like. So we can really start to get their reactions about how they might like to see these things come into their community. We want everybody to benefit, but we want to make sure that we do not, continue the harms of the past. And so that Sound Lab research is something that we hope we can share with other cities, especially cities like Atlanta that share so much in common with Los Angeles.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. And going more into that, AAM aircrafts will still require landing areas. So thinking about the equity and the concerns from the past, how do you propose we build this infrastructure in cities that currently have limited space and land like LA and Atlanta?
Go ahead, Salita. Yeah.
So I think that we need to come up with a tiered policy making. So there may be regional hubs where larger or louder aircraft can take off and land, maybe near existing airports or other regional hubs like Union Station. But then at smaller distributed hubs throughout our neighborhoods, we want to have a higher bar and make sure that those aircraft are quieter. Maybe they're more appropriate for aircraft that are carrying cargo, that are delivering things to restaurants and other sort of retail establishments or even residents in those arenas. And so I think there is a thoughtful approach to policymaking where we really can come up with some creative ideas that directly address the needs of communities. We don't need another solution in search of a problem. And I think that's where sort of thoughtful city voices at the table can make the difference between success and failure for this industry as it scales.
Thank you. And Mr. Bree, in your testimony, you mentioned that companies based in China currently dominate the US market share of drones by 80%. What would it take for the United States-based companies to manufacture drones at the same rate or faster than what is currently being manufactured by these other companies?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. I think this is an incredibly important issue and topic, and something that we think a lot about at Skydio, and we're proud of the progress that we've made. I think just a few years ago, people thought it wasn't possible for a US company to build a competitive product. And we're showing now on the strength of our artificial intelligence and autonomy that we can build a product that is winning just on the strength of its capabilities for a really wide range of customers. And I think that's really the most important thing is using the things that the US is good at. And we've led the way in cell phones with the transition to software-defined devices, with the iPhone, with Android. I think there's a similar opportunity with drones as AI and autonomy become more important. So I think getting the product piece right is most important. And anything that's good for domestic manufacturing is also going to be good for the US drone industry. So we started building our drones in the US because it was the way to get the best product the fastest with the fastest development times. Drones are really like other aerospace products where there's tight integration between hardware and software and manufacturing.
Thank you, Mr. Bree. Thank you, Representative Williams. Time's expired. I'll now recognize Representative Johnson of Georgia and followed by Representative Brownlee of California. So I recognize Representative Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask Mr. Harter, how has the COVID-19 pandemic illuminated the need for greater innovation in the aerospace industry? And how can Congress amplify its role in incentivizing greater innovation in the aerospace industry?
Thank you, Congressman Johnson, for the question. So how has COVID illuminated innovation in aerospace? That was a question, correct?
Yeah, how has the pandemic illuminated the need for greater innovation in the industry?
I can't say that I've thought about that particularly, but let me try and shed some light on that. So I think what we've seen is a big impact in air travel. We've certainly seen the airlines and OEMs respond with innovation in ensuring that air is clean inside the air vehicles as we fly, and we've seen great innovation there and very good progress. There's been a lot of research and effort spent in ensuring that the way that we clean the aircraft doesn't damage them. And I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in the way seats are configured, the way people board airplanes, and continued innovation in the way air is cleaned on board the airplanes as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Does anyone else have a care to respond to that question?
Yes, this is Roy Gonzarski. I'll be happy to add, COVID has showed us that people can work from home regularly. Many companies have already said that even post-COVID, people can continue working from home because it saves costs and increases productivity. What that means is, and we saw an article today in CNBC saying that younger generations are now moving out of the cities, where once people were afraid of gentrification, of city costs going up, now it's the opposite. People are moving more into the suburbs, more into rural areas. That means now that low-cost aviation can connect them when they do need to come to the office once a week, once every 2 weeks. They can come with low-cost, clean energy electric aircraft from a small airport nearby. The second thing,
all right.
COVID.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
The second thing is with COVID, maybe people don't want to come an hour ahead to their flight, stand in line with hundreds and thousands of other people at a large congested airport. Maybe they would prefer to come 15 minutes ahead of time with only 10 or 15 other people to a smaller airport. So both those aspects are making changes.
Okay.
I'd like to comment on, yes, on behalf of the Choctaw Nation, in a way that we were not ready with regulation. We had communities when the pandemic started reaching out to us because they wanted to do contactless delivery. They said, is there anything we can do to do drone delivery now to get supplies to assisted living centers, basically to reduce that contact, human to human. And the regulatory system was not ready. So we saw a lot of other technologies, businesses that were using things like curbside delivery, online ordering, app ordering. They were able to shift and society was able to adjust very quickly. On the side of things like drone delivery, where society could have benefited, the regulatory system was not ready. We could not get anything in place to do any sort of meaningful missions or to help the public, specifically because the regulatory system has been so slow to get to where we are now. So I'd say our regulatory system actually delayed our ability to respond, in my opinion, very proactively and very constructively to the pandemic response.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I have a couple of things to throw in here. I think we're going to see that one of the effects of the pandemic is it's going to actually accelerate the adoption of supersonic flight. And that's for a couple reasons. First is the more we're able to do things over Zoom, the less tolerance people are going to have for the time, inconvenience, hassle that air travel takes today. And the more attractive, the faster, speedier flights are going to be. So that's thought number one. And thought number two is the way the aircraft fit into the airline fleets is changing. Airlines, as we know, have downsized their subsonic fleets, many retiring aircraft 10, 15 years ahead of when they otherwise would have. And as we exit the pandemic and we see the air travel starts to recover, there's going to be a new generation of fleet plans made at airlines, and supersonic for the first time is going to be baked into those from day one. And that's going to result in a much faster adoption of high speed than what we would have seen otherwise.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to ask you a question, Mr. Bride, but the technology is very interesting. I wanted to ask about weaponized drones. You don't produce those, do you?
We do not. We're focused on camera drones.
Yield back.
All right. Thank you, Representative Johnson. We'll have Representative Brownlee and followed by Representative Payne. Representative Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for having this very interesting hearing. My first question is to Mr. Mayor, and you've sort of already touched upon this question, but I wanted to ask it anyway. So can you kind of explain how your city is engaging with the community to determine these vertiport locations for UAM, and how UAM is really being integrated into an extraordinary transit system being developed and in progress right now in Los Angeles?
Yeah, it's actually very exciting, Representative, to engage the community. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of fear. I think human beings are either totally horrified by this or totally excited by this, and there's not a lot of people in between. And sometimes human beings can contain both of those emotions together. But for instance, I chair our metro system for Los Angeles County, the third busiest transit system in the country. When we're just changing our bus service or looking at new rail lines in anticipation of the Olympics, we engaged as many as 20,000 people. it's been tougher to engage people around this. And so we're looking for creative ways with the FAA and others. And FAA has done a great job of putting safety first, though we need to have the ability maybe to test some of this stuff a little bit more real time. We are looking at those conversations, but we're trying to engage people with things like what Salita Reynolds has done with our Department of Transportation, is you can go someplace and listen to the difference between a helicopter, a drone. You can look at some of the AM options and hear that in most neighborhoods in Los Angeles, for instance, you don't really hear much of the electric drone noise because it's already louder than that. We don't have, as you know, a lot of rural areas where there's a lot of quiet. So we're looking at ways to engage people where it's not just, what do you think of the boogeyman, or are you excited about the Jetsons? It's more like, listen to this. How do you move from place to place? Where would you want a vertiport if one was here? And how would you use it? Would you want it mostly to deliver packages in this area? Or would it be something that human beings should be able to use? And how do you get accessibility through a private building for a public good? So those are some of the things, but I think it's going to be a challenge for us across the country to engage people on the technology they don't really know anything more than a caricature about at this point.
What are 2 or 3 things at the top of your list that Congress should be doing to integrate UAM into the transportation systems?
Absolutely. I mean, first, just with drones in general and UAM, I think it's very important. As I said, FAA has done a great job putting safety first, whether it's NASA in the Grand Challenge or the Agility Prime in the Air Force. But at LAX, for instance, we have, I think, 260 reported cases of unauthorized drones in the area since 2016. And we can't test some of the kind of defensive work that we need to do to detect and to mitigate and have remote IDs. I think that would be a critical thing that Congress could help us and the FAA could help us do in the short term. I think also it's very important that Congress, like I said, establish national standards and allow the local flexibility, especially when it comes to land use, so that we're not overruled on things. We're often overruled, as we know, about the flight paths, and people complain about them that are under them. When it comes to land use, people get even more intense. So I think that automation, deconfliction, helping work with planning departments, and then finally working together to understand the technical requirements of aircraft, but also their impacts on the noise, the density, environment, and privacy. Those would be the main things that I would, and how do you fund the infrastructure? Is this something that cities pay for, or are tribal areas, are areas and cities going to be potentially left behind if they're not higher income parts of America? And again, we create that 2-class transportation system.
And do you think FAA is hearing your message regarding federal standard, but local control?
There's been some, I think they're hearing it for sure, and we look forward to actually the implementation of that as well. And that's tough. I know FAA doesn't want 10,000 local standards, but a standard to allow local flexibility, especially when it comes to what gets built in cities and even rural areas, I think that's absolutely critical.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Scholl, I wanted to just comment to you. I have very limited time now, but you had mentioned SAF and what the federal government needs to do to, increase its supply and supply chain. And I just wanted to let you know that I have a bill, a great bill to do just that. And I would hope that you take a hard look at it and join many in the aviation industry in supporting the bill in terms of moving forward for cleaner fuels for all of aviation. So appreciate your interest. And with that, I will yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Brownlee. The chair, before recognizing Representative Payne, would note that Representative Stanton and Norton are next in order after Representative Payne, who is now recognized for 5 minutes. Sorry, we'll just move on and we'll come back to Representative Payne. Representative Stanton from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you fine. Go ahead, Greg.
All right, great. What a fascinating hearing and an important hearing. So thank you for holding it. The aviation industry plays such a critical role in Arizona's economy, supporting good jobs, making it easier for travelers and workers to get to our region, shaping local communities, and impacting our environment. We already see how technology and innovative practices can transform every aspect of our lives. And it's no surprise that the aviation industry is evolving as well. In Arizona, we're committed to being at the forefront of transportation innovation. That includes the latest in aerospace and defense, clean public transit, autonomous vehicle testing, and drones. The common thread is that these innovations are strengthening our economy and our local communities. And as government leaders, we're here today to explore how innovations in aviation can improve policymaking and the way we invest in infrastructure. My first set of questions are for Mr. Bride, CEO of Skydio. Drones play an increasingly important role in the way we inspect infrastructure, such as roads and bridges. It's a job that, when done by humans, can be incredibly dangerous. And you addressed this during your testimony, but I want to hear a little bit more. How can the FAA help to promote safe and effective use of drones to inspect America's aging infrastructure?
Thank you, Representative Sandin. It's a great question, and it's something that we're really excited to be working on at Skydio. I think that the first thing is just recognizing the benefits, as you allude to. There's incredible safety benefits for the workers doing these inspections, and it's also a positive transformation for the inspections themselves. You get a full digital record of the structure, makes it easy to track changes over time. So we really think this is the future of this industry. From the FAA's perspective, from a regulatory perspective, I think the most important thing is unlocking autonomous operations from the ground up. We have the data now with our customers, and there's other companies doing similar things, to know there's the potential for safe operations very close to the ground, where drones pose no risk to manned aircraft, they pose no risk to people on the ground, and there's tremendous benefits for the people operating them. And I think that's really the place to start. And we can scale up in size and altitude from there.
Okay, that's great. And then I know you've talked a little bit, I want to hear a little bit more about how the use of drone technology can help the environment. How can drones help mitigate carbon emissions and play a role in reducing climate change?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is another really important area, and I think an area of tremendous opportunity. So in basically every industry where our customers are using drones, the kind of status quo technology is some piece of heavy machinery. It could be a snooper truck for bridge inspection. These trucks actually get about 5 miles to the gallon. They have to drive them all over the country to perform bridge inspections. Could be a crewed helicopter, which burns hundreds of gallons of fuel per hour. And a drone uses negligible energy. It's all electric. So the general story is the more that we're using drones to perform this work, the smaller the carbon footprint is going to be. We've done some analysis on this with our customers that finds that using drones for bridge inspection, just a fraction of the bridges in a state, is equivalent to removing thousands of cars from the road. And the more that we do that across the country, the more that we're going to see the benefits.
That's great. And my next question is for Mayor Garcetti. Great to see you. Thank you for your outstanding testimony today. The balancing act between federal jurisdiction and the role of local governments as it relates to drones. When I was mayor of Phoenix, I expressed some frustration when the FAA was trying to regulate airspace over the city and didn't really understand the full context of my city, particularly desert preserves and the importance of protecting desert preserves in my city. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your thoughts about the balancing act between the role of the FAA in drone regulation and what is the role of local governments in managing low altitude airspace over cities.
I'm sorry, this is the chair. Before you answer that, and I'll give you a few extra seconds here, Greg, reminding members to mute yourselves if you're not questioning, because you are talking is interrupting the questioner and the answers. Mute yourself if you are not currently asking questions.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I mean, Representative Stanton, it's great to see you. And I know that experience you've had. Certainly, I think at some lower level, on the lowest level, that you have to have some local ownership, some local power, some local jurisdiction, because it does become the city itself, not just the airspace above it. We've been working with Google and others to kind of how to even map three-dimensionally the space above a city and what's the basic unit of that, something that Selena Reynolds has been the cutting edge of. And I think making sure that we can, again, around that planning, land use, and transit connections, this isn't something that is autonomous, no pun intended, from the rest of the way we get around cities. It has to be integrated in, and that has to be a fundamental understanding. So I think that's the best way to approach that and to empower local governments, maybe whether it's at a certain altitude or certainly not mandating how and where, unless it's around equity. I would welcome some sort of federal mandates where cities have to make sure this is done equitably and affordably, but then we can figure out exactly how to hit that standard. And finally, from your previous question, as chair of our LA Metro, we use drones right now to inspect our rail infrastructure, and our fire department uses them all the time for hotspots. So we're already seeing that from a public safety perspective, not just transportation.
All right, thank you for the excellent answer, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Stanton. We're going to flip back again to Representative Payne, and then after that, go to Representative Norton. Representative Payne, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, sorry for not being there when called on. It was a bit of a dilemma. The Uber Eats guy came right at the same time you called on me, so I had to go pick up the Uber Eats. So I'm back, though. Thank you.
We understand. Go ahead.
Let's see, Mr. Grimsley, emerging aviation technologies such as unmanned systems have the potential to greatly assist underserved communities. Businesses that have been historically discriminated against should not be left out of the process of developing these new technologies and bringing them to consumers. Can you explain why it is important that disadvantaged businesses be given a fair shot to implement emerging aviation technologies?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you very much for that. I think, I'm an optimist when it comes to technology. I see technology as always a potential equalizer and opportunity where we can see communities actually change the way they have access to quality of life through technology. I could give an example. I also serve as an Oklahoma Transportation Commissioner, so I have some oversight responsibility over our roadways and our bridges. And in our area, it's very historically impoverished, very poor area historically. The roads are not that great. And so your life, your access to health care or just the risk of safety of driving around is at risk because of these roads are not always up to the standards that they need to be for the traveling public. I see technology such as drones and even AAM as being able to allow us to leapfrog, to allow communities that don't quite have that infrastructure in place and roadways to get access to health services or get access to emergency health care or to get access to other things that improve their quality of life by leapfrogging very quickly. So I think it's very important that we ensure equity in what we're doing. We're seeing some tremendous things happening within the Choctaw Nation, and that is an area that traditionally has not had access to a lot of things, but it's happening very quickly now because of technology. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, that I wish I had picked up on the topic for today a bit earlier. I work with several minority drone companies in Maryland. The consortium of 4 African-American companies that have gotten together that are in the drone space. So maybe one day we can look at people, minorities in that space and what they're doing. So just as potentially a topic in the future. Mayor Garcetti, it's good to see you here once again. Unmanned spacecraft, aircraft systems, or UAS, have opened the doors to numerous practical applications that improve lives and benefit communities. However, they must be used in a responsible manner, especially when used in dense urban areas near major airports, such as Los Angeles or Newark, where I'm from. How have you been engaging with your community to educate them on the responsible use of UAS, and what advice do you have for other cities who wish to do the same?
It's a great question, Representative Payne, and I hope Uber Air delivered your food. I know they're talking about aerial delivery. I think, it's a really good question because you really have a bunch of hobbyists right now, and trying to get to them is like trying to find your tweezers in the haystack and pull out the people that are engaged in this. The rest of us are kind of watching it and wondering about it. But we do, I think what I would advise is kind of traditional community organizing, going into communities and putting together, we have a system of neighborhood councils, folks who are already interested in traffic and transportation issues, and empowering them to be the voices and then provide them not just what do you think of X, but give a curriculum, give them an experience, which is why our Department of Transportation is actually going and inviting community members to listen to what these things hear about, mapping and going around the city to see where noise is variable. Those things can empower you beyond just the particular issue of UAS. I think it's for all of us to be able to look at ways of empowering ourselves in the system, and that equity of access, that availability and affordability of services. For instance, we're trying to make transit free in Los Angeles, a bold pilot to make our metro lines, which we already do with our city bus lines, free for everybody. What does that mean when it comes to aerial transportation as well? And giving them the choice of weighing in on themselves being moved by these vehicles versus the goods that they need or the supplies for the businesses they go to. But it is a tough one. I think there should be some funding that goes into that community capacity and organizing, or else this will be a conversation among a lot of geeky experts like us, but it won't engage the public at large.
Well, thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Payne, and your suggestion is so noted by the staff, and so we'll follow up with you, Representative Payne, on meeting with some of these folks in the drone business, the minority-owned drone businesses. Next up will be Congresswoman Norton from the District of Columbia. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is really not a futuristic hearing because the future is now. I want to begin with Mr. Garcetti. I'm interested in jobs and economic opportunity. When you say that particularly when you say there are 280,000 new jobs coming by 2035, I'm interested in the wages and opportunities. Are there existing pipelines to ensure a diverse talent pool, particularly of underrepresented minorities, or is this going to be an all-white matter?
Well, it's such an important question, and we're trying to make that be reflective of our city and our nation. Los Angeles is kind of the face of the nation, I think, tomorrow in many ways, and we're doing everything from setting up transportation schools that are focused on children who have experienced homelessness, been in the foster care system, live in our lowest income communities of color, and getting them from the 7th grade into a public school that will prepare them for transportation careers as engineers and investors and builders, people who will be operators and maintainers of systems, as well as people who can run agencies. New York had one of these, and we looked at it, and Phil Washington, the head of our metro system, and I, at the time, Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas, are building this school. Then we're going to our community colleges, which I think is absolutely critical, saving some of those aerospace maintenance programs that have existed through our public schools, our adult schools, and our community colleges. And that's absolutely critical, because if we get this wrong, then there will be a backlash, I think, against this. People won't see those jobs. In LA, 50,000 people in LA County are in aerospace jobs, 300,000 indirect and direct jobs in the Southern California region. So it's an immense manufacturer. We're also going straight to those companies and asking them to make pledges to hire more diversely and to train more diversely, because that's the pipeline of what's coming. I say, don't wait for the pipeline to produce, build it ourselves. And I think federal funds that would go into those sorts of job training. And last piece, local hire. Please let us hire locally when we're investing our money in local transportation to support this and any transportation measures, something that was allowed in the Obama administration and taken away.
That's encouraging, Mayor. Mr. Stoll, I am a co-chair of the Bright Skies Caucus. I'm particularly concerned, particularly here in the district, about noise, aircraft noise.
Congresswoman Norton, would you just suspend for a moment? There's some background noise. If everyone could mute yourselves, please. Thank you.
I'm going to give you Virgin Galactic.
No, thank you. Please mute yourselves.
If I could,
Go ahead,
if
Congress.
my time could begin again, sir.
No, we stopped your clock. Don't worry about it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My question was for Mr. Scholl, because here in the nation's capital, we've been particularly concerned about aircraft noise and supersonic flights were once infamous for that. I am a co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus. I understand that Overture will only fly at supersonic speeds over water to avoid creating supersonic booms. Still, even flying at normal speeds, aircraft generate a significant amount of noise. Is there research that would allow these aircraft to mitigate noise?
Thank you for the question. And we share your view and concern that aviation impacts to communities need to be minimized and continue to make forward progress. And you're right, supersonic flight over water only. So sonic boom isn't a consideration at all. And secondarily, we're using the latest generation propulsion technology and optimizing the airplane. So Overture is going to meet the same most stringent noise levels that apply to latest generation subsonic aircraft. So completely different than the last generation of supersonics. You were asking about R&D that could further advance that. There are opportunities that are kind of on the drawing board today, something called variable cycle engines, for example, that are going to allow us in next generations to push to even higher speeds while being even quieter at the same time. So we've got even more to look forward to here in supersonics going forward in the future.
Could I ask you, Mrs. Gold, will Overture follow the same routes as current aircrafts over the same communities, or will it need new routes for its flight speed?
So over airport communities, it will take off and land just like every other airplane today. No need for special integration into the airspace.
Thank you. I have a final question for Mr. Bree. Mr. Bree, drones interest me, and you mentioned education and training as some of the programming that Congress should enact in order to build a workforce. Let me ask you, drones with artificial intelligence cameras and sensors pose serious concerns for privacy that only grows as these technologies become more ubiquitous. How are you as a company building in safeguards for privacy as you build your technology?
Mr. Bree, we'll give you 30 seconds to answer that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Representative, for that question. I think this is an incredibly important topic and something that we think a lot about at Skydio. So the most important thing that we do is only send customer data back to us if they explicitly choose to do so. So our app makes this very clear. If customers want to, they can say, share flight logs with Skydio. There's all kinds of reasons why somebody might want to do that to help us debug an issue or improve their experience. But it's totally transparent to customers and it's up to them. And we're actually the first drone company in the world to announce a set of ethical principles that guide our work. Privacy, civil liberties, transparency are at the forefront for us. And I think this is an area where we need collaboration between companies and lawmakers.
Thank you, and thank you, Congresswoman Norton. Chair now recognizes Representative Johnson of Texas for 5 minutes, and Representative Garamendi will follow Representative Johnson. Representative Johnson from Texas for 5 minutes. Just waiting for Representative Johnson maybe to return. We'll put her in the queue, and we'll go to Representative Garamendi for 5 minutes. Sorry, Representative Garamendi, catch you mid-lunch there.
Much,
sorry about
Mr.
that.
Chairman. Hello, Mr. Larson.
You're good.
Fascinating hearing. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. Mayor Garcetti, you seem to be a very busy person this morning. You seem to be the focus of a lot of attention. Perhaps that's because LA is such an important city with such an awesome mayor. But I have a question for you, Mayor. Sure. The upgrading of your airports requires a pile of money. We have a financing program at the federal government for transportation, mostly for highways. It's called TIFIA.
Yep.
We've been trying to expand TIFIA to include other modes of transportation, particularly airports, so that the investment in those airports could be could be made using government financing. Federal government can borrow money now 20 years, maybe in 30 years, somewhere around 2%. It seems to me to make enormous sense for us to take advantage of that, make that money available through the TIFIA program for airports such as yours and others around the nation so that they can meet the requirements of much of what Mr. Larson has put on the table today. So what do you think about going with TIFIA? And if you think it's a cool idea, then would you support it? If you think it's a bad idea, just don't say anything. What do you have for us, Mayor?
Well, the feeling is mutual towards you. Thank you for your excellent service to our state and our country. As I mentioned, it's the third busiest airport in the world, second busiest in the United States, and the biggest airport improvement program in America, $15 billion. And in my State of the City address just last week, I greenlit 3 more terminals. We've essentially, as folks put it, done open heart surgery on somebody while they're running a marathon, because we had to keep this going while building every terminal out, as well as 3 new terminals, 4 now that we've greenlit. We would love, in anticipation of the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games returning to American soil, and we would take advantage of kind of TIFIA funds if they were available for airports, together with a long overdue increase to the PFC cap and added flexibility for AIP funding. We would absolutely welcome it. I think it's a brilliant idea.
Well, thank you. We do share brilliant ideas. It's good to work with you. I don't know how many years we've been at it, but it's been a good long while and a good run. Hang in there, and we'll see what we can do. I think we got a good shot at this. If you could talk to the other mayors, other airport folks around,
you got it.
Many of whom are on this, I think we can push this thing through. The other question goes, if I might, to Mr. Harter, and this has to do with my work on the Armed Services Committee. We're trying to green the military. We're trying to see if we can really force them to reduce the consumption of carbon fuels, particularly hydrocarbons, petroleum products. Conservation is one of the best ways of doing that, but beyond conservation and going to battery-powered vehicles, including Abrams tanks, that would be hybrid, the fuel is still petroleum-based. And what I'm looking for here is really what we can do, how we can move the military to be a early starter on biofuels of all kinds. And so if you could comment on that, and any of your colleagues want to jump into it, that would be cool too. So what do you think here? Can we do that?
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, I think there's already a lot of work being done in that area. I think Mr. Scholl addressed that earlier with some of his comments on sustainable aviation fuels. And I think all of that research that's underway on sustainability of fuels is applicable to the military. I certainly think it helps with your work on the Armed Services Committee to make that a focal point for the military and have them emphasize that more in their research. I also think a lot of the other technologies we're talking about here today are going to help with that greenifying. So, drones being able to deliver, equipment, supplies to the soldier on the front lines, not just the last mile, but part of that, the last 100 miles of delivery. Electric aircraft, as Mr. Garcetti talked about, is going to evolve and will eventually be able to carry, our soldiers and equipment into battle and replace some of those fixed wing and non-fixed wing aircraft that we have flying today.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask all of you to lobby your Congress members about the military and going green in the military and going to biofuels and using the military to bring into the market these new fuels. With that, I'm going to yield back my remaining 13 seconds. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Garcetti. We'll now recognize, I think Representative Johnson is back. Representative Johnson of Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you for this very interesting and needed hearing and all of our witnesses. I'd also like to ask unanimous consent to put my opening statement in the record.
Without objection.
And let me say, Mayor Garcetti, I really liked your attitude about preparing staff. I chair the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and we are very concerned about the lack of diversity in our STEM careers. And across the board here, as we talk about this future, and it sounds exciting, but I want all of the people to comment on where they're getting talent and what are they doing to expand the talent and trying to reach all of these goals that we have in this technology, and especially at home in the United States. So let me start with you, Mayor, to see if you have any other comments on producing more talent, diversity, both by gender, whatever, and then move to the other witnesses.
So we have what I think is a national model for going to technology companies, including aerospace technology companies, as well as digital and biotech and other technology companies, something called Pledge LA with the Annenberg Foundation. It's voluntary, but it's been highly successful and uses peer pressure. It started with kind of an equity framework we're using on ourselves, hiring in the city of Los Angeles. But it essentially has two aspects. It goes to companies, over 100 of them, and their funders. So it goes to private equity, venture capital, other funders, and ask them to sign a pledge to look at the hiring of more women, of more people of color and other disenfranchised communities, as well as then second, applying some of their brilliance to problems that our communities face. I have an Italian last name because of an Italian who went through Mexico, but my father's whole side of the family is Mexican-American. Looking at the Latino community, for instance, the STEM careers were greatly lagging. African-American community as well, many Pacific Islander communities and some Asian American communities, our Native communities. So it starts with that, and over 100 companies have signed off on kind of self-imposing that, and that becomes very collaborative. It becomes, if you're not doing that, you're not an excellent company here in Los Angeles anymore. And I think that's a great model, building on some of the other things I mentioned, like the schools and community colleges before.
I just want to jump in here. Thank you, Representative, for raising this issue. It's come up a couple of times. I think it's incredibly important, and it's one that I'm incredibly excited about. And I think drones can actually be one of the most valuable tools, not just for the drone industry, but for all of aviation and all of aerospace, because it's one of the few aerospace devices that people can actually use themselves and see how it works and benefit from. And so at Skydio, we're doing a few things. We're donating drones to underrepresented communities or groups that focus on underrepresented communities to get them exposed to the technology. In our own recruiting efforts, we engage with college and campus groups that focus on diversity. And I think there's an opportunity for Congress here as well. So I have more details on this in my written statement, but something like a drone infrastructure inspection grant program could not only provide funding to state departments of transportation for using drones for inspection, but could provide funding to educate folks on how to use drones and really empower a new generation of workers with very diverse backgrounds.
I'd love to comment as well. Our core principle for building our culture here at Boom is to make the company the place where the most talented people on the planet can be inspired and enabled to do the best and most meaningful work of their careers. And today, many of the most talented, best people on the planet don't even consider careers in aerospace. And so this is a problem that runs deep, and you have to solve it at many levels. We focus on diversity at every level of the company at Boom. I'm proud to have a very diverse leadership team with me, but we have to go much further beyond that. We need to do things that inspire the next generation of people to think about what they can do and to take on more challenging careers. But even more than that, we have to reach all the way back into early childhood and make sure that people have the opportunity and the education that they need to go off and do great things, and that everybody from every walk of life can look in the mirror and say, I'm somebody who can do something great. I'm somebody who can change the world. I'm somebody who can take on a tough challenge. And that is a very tall order, but if we inspire people, we focus on education, we can make it happen.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the Choctaw Nation, I can say, just like the other witnesses here, we're focusing on that middle school and even younger age, because that's when students develop a sense of confidence, when they develop their passions. An observation I've had on the IPP and beyond is some of our biggest champions within our region, within the reservation, are school superintendents and our STEM educators, because the kids hear about what we're doing. They ask questions, they kind of get interested and excited about it, but it gives the STEM educators an opportunity to start to talk to them about STEM opportunities. And so we've made it a priority that the pipeline that you're talking about, we have to start building it at that middle school level to make sure that it propagates all the way through the university level. So that's very important to us. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. And next is Representative Titus of Nevada. Representative Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's very interesting hearing this morning. I'd like to change the subject a little bit. We've heard a lot about the technological developments of the aircraft itself, but not too much about the impact it's going to have on infrastructure. What's going to be needed at our airports to accommodate these new kind of aircraft? Are the air traffic controllers engaged? How are we going to be able to provide some of these alternative sustainable fuels? Could Mr. Ganzarski or Mr. Skoll talk about those kinds of changes that they see coming or that we need to be considering as we take up an infrastructure bill that looks at modernizing our airports?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address
comment. So I think there are a couple things here that are important to emphasize. When it comes to sustainable aviation fuels, the technologies all exist. The biggest challenge is how do we scale them up? So finding ways to make investments in the SAF supply chain is going to be critical for making sure those fuels not just exist in laboratories in small quantities, but actually go into aircraft. And today, the SAF capacity for planned projects is just about 6% of what we're going to need in 2030. So there's a lot of work to do there to scale things up. You know, the other piece of this is airports. And when we think about the ways transportation is going to get faster, the advanced urban mobility with vertical takeoff and landing, as well as supersonic, all of a sudden our airports can start to become a bottleneck. And so I think there's an opportunity there to say, how can we think differently about how we build and operate airports such that these can also come up to that experience that we're going to see in the transportation itself.
And I like to add to that, and I'll even oversimplify it. In the next 5 years, you will see electric aircraft, traditional fixed-wing aircraft that take off from airports and land at airports, start to fly in the country. This country has over 10,000 airports that these aircraft can fly in and out of. So you don't need to invest in infrastructure. You do need electrical power, which lo and behold, most of these airports have. Most of the states are now going to renewable energy, so we can even perhaps install renewable energy sources at the airports themselves. The beauty of small aircraft going to and from airports is that we change the way we think about aviation. As long as we think about hub and spoke, everyone having to go to one large airport, then yes, airports get condensed and the costs go up. But if you think of most Americans and where they travel, it's locally, which means 200, 300, 400 miles. They would rather fly to and from an airport next to them, which means less flights per each of those airports. So the infrastructure challenge, while there, can be solved easier than we think. But having incentives from the government to these small airports to help is critical.
Thank you. That's interesting. Thank you very much. I'd also like to ask Mayor Garcetti or anybody about the interconnectivity and regionally. You know, we are not nearly so connected in the Southwest as they are in the Northeast. And part of that's geography, part of it's demographic patterns, part of it is people just like to get in their car out here and drive wherever they want to go. But as we develop this kind of aircraft, how are we looking at regional approaches? So you can start in Los Angeles and come and see me in Las Vegas, and you won't run into different kinds of regulations or barriers to getting here.
Well, I'll jump in because whether it's high-speed rail or the highway that we're constantly trying to improve between our cities, we essentially are part of one state and two states. You know, we have more in common sometimes than we do with folks who are quote unquote in our state than with each other. Salita, do you want to address that a little bit? Because we're talking about regional work and making sure with rural and urban areas we can develop these standards and create that. So let me toss that over to Salita for a couple of words, if you don't mind.
I really appreciate the question, Representative Titus, and just want to flag that, you know, when we talk about not wanting a patchwork of regulations so that industry can scale, what we don't mean is preemption, right? But in order to make sure that we retain our ability to sort of have the community voice heard and control our destiny, we have to collaborate and get together. So we've been working very closely with different organizations like CAMI and others to try and exercise that convening power of government to think about a golden triangle of aviation that is, you know, connects Los Angeles and Las Vegas and Phoenix, and how we can all sort of grow together and come up with that policy framework that can be used broadly, because you're right, the potential for regional interconnectivity is tremendous. I think one of the things that we can't walk past, though, is the needs for the municipal power grids. An airplane needs to be able to recharge in Los Angeles or recharge in Las Vegas, and our municipal grids, to your question about infrastructure, really need shoring up to enable that future. So whether it's infrastructure or it's questions about land use, I think there's a powerful role for local voices to play at the front end of this technology, and that's where we are now. So it's a perfect time to get together and come up with some great ideas.
Well, thank you so much. Just make it easier for Mayor Garcetti to come over here and see me in Las Vegas.
You got it.
Thank you, Representative Titus. And that actually concludes member questions. I want to thank the members for their attentiveness to this hearing, to their great questions. It's not often we get a chance to have hearings on things that we have to think about for the future, but I think as Congresswoman Norton said, Holmes Norton said, the future kind of is now in terms of innovation in the airspace. But I really do want to thank the members for their questions. I want to thank the staff for putting this together. I want to thank the panel for providing us a broad spectrum of ideas that we need to think about as we help the FAA sort out what the new entrants in the airspace are, who they're going to be, what they're going to be, how they're going to be using the airspace, and ways we can help. So with that, this concludes our hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony. Your comments have been informative and very helpful. And I want to ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. With that objection so ordered, and with that, the subcommittee now stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member.